This is the VIP Podcast, Virginia in Politics. Let's listen to host Chris Saxman explore the personalities and policies that connect the Commonwealth. The VIP Podcast is brought to you by the VCTA, Broadband Association of Virginia, and Virginia Free. The views and opinions expressed here do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the VCTA and Virginia Free or our sponsors.
Chris Saxman back here on the VIP Podcast, brought to you by VCTA, the Broadband Association of Virginia, and Virginia Free, of which I am its executive director. Joining us today is a repeat VIP, Delegate Chris Head.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you. Happy crossover.
Happy crossover.
Cheers. That's what we do in the General Assembly buildings. We drink coffee in the morning. So tell us about session. What's going on?
A lot and not much. I don't know. Isn't that a line out of The Sun Also Rises? How did you go bankrupt? You know, two ways.
Slowly
right?
at first.
You know, slowly and then suddenly.
Well, it's like we were talking.
It's the same sort of thing.
Before we went on there, we were talking about changing diapers, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's what dads do.
Right.
And you know, how's raising children? It's a lot, but not much.
Yeah.
They're not, but it's a lot, but you don't realize what you're really building sometimes. And we talked, you know, about a piece of legislation on broadband and railroads. Difficult to get. So let's talk about that bill as an example of it takes a lot to get things done, but this is not going to be a motivator.
Before we got started, you had asked me the question of we just in chatting when you said, you know, there's not been a lot of bomb throwing and there hasn't been, you know, why we're not seeing the pyrotechnics that we sometimes see. And I think part of that is it's an election year in brand new districts and everybody's kind of trying to figure out, you know, and you also know you got a split government here. Right. So anything that gets too outlandish in the House, the Senate's going to kill. Anything too outlandish in the Senate, the House is going to kill.
Well, let's back up a little bit on the redistricting election overlay. It's not new, but this year is very new because these districts are going to be permanent. And you've been through a number of re-elections, including, I think, right after the most recent redistrictings. Is that new redistricting dynamic that much different this year?
You know, I don't know. I think so. It certainly is for me because it's changed what I'm running for. Because I'm running for Senate now instead of for re-election because my House district was blown to smithereens. But you know, there's a lot of different dynamics with it. But I think as much as anything, you've got that coming in and people being measured a little bit more. And I think you've also then got just the dynamic of the split chambers, keeping it a little bit more measured. And because it's an election year, everybody's ready to get through, get out, go home, and get started.
Why take the hard vote in your chamber if the other chamber is going to defeat it? So why do that?
Why you know? I mean, there are times when it is important to do that.
Of course, but it seems like to your point and to our previous conversation, lack of pyrotechnics. There's not a lot of red meat this year. It seems like the churn is going on. There's a lot of important bills that people aren't going to get excited about back home.
You mentioned, because we were chatting a little earlier about my broadband bill. Have a bill that is going to be limiting what railroads can charge, how long they can take to allow a broadband company to cross the railroad track, the easement for that. Right. Because that has been a real barrier. And so what we've done is in the bill that's in the companion bill that Senator Stanley is carrying has already passed the Senate and mine passed the House yesterday. And then we'll, you know, so this is moving down the track here, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended.
Well, actually across the track.
Yes. But, you know, you say that it's not a real sexy kind of thing.
That's not going on a bumper sticker.
Right.
It's not going on a brochure.
But when you have a chance to then talk to constituents about it and say, look, we got this done. And they may initially go, yeah, so. And then you explain it just a little bit of why it's important. And then everybody goes, oh, that's great. You know, that, yeah. They agree with you. They agree, but it's not anything that, you know, it's just like, that's just, you know.
That's not a brochure bill.
Well, but you know, Chris, it kind of is in the sense that what people are, what I had the opportunity to do with this is governing.
I mean, is the political market shifting?
Well, here's what I think people are really hungry for is there need to be some adults in the room.
Right.
And you know, I think if you can start carrying policies, carrying legislation, and promoting policies that demonstrate that this is just sober-minded governance.
Get stuff done.
Get it done.
Just get it done.
And I think at least that's what I mean.
Well, I mean,
For the most part, I've always tried to do that.
Right,
But
Virginia is a bellwether, and if we are changing American politics, and people have been clamoring for years or saying that they want people to just get the work done and work across the aisle, but it never seems to happen. It seems to get gradually worse.
Well,
but if Virginia is changing because of the dynamics of redistricting, and it's like, look, this is an election year. We're not going to do crazy stuff. The message of the most recent elections is, don't do this crazy stuff anymore, and maybe the market is changing towards that.
Maybe, and we'll see what happens on this. It's going to be very different. At the same time, not to be contradictory, but this is sort of the world of politics, right?
I'm just exploring it in real time here.
At the same time, we've got a lot of folks, particularly out my way, that are just really anxious for us to take a stand on the things that are traditional value statement kind of things and really do something to reverse field. You've got the issues with schools and parental rights.
School choice bills.
School choice bills and parental rights as far as notification of what's going on with their child in the school.
You're feeling a lot of that pressure.
I hear a lot from that. I mean, from home, I hear people talk about that. When you start talking about the knowing of what they're being taught in the schools, and as well as what's going on as far as content. Is that the number one issue in the Republican
base right now? Parental rights, schools.
That's a big one. That's a big one. Equal to that is the judicial reforms that were put into place in the interest of trying to be, for lack of a better thing, be on the side of the criminal. What we passed on, when we were completely out of control. I mean,
okay.
And people want that rolled back. People do not like the fact that we released a lot of felons.
They want
law and order.
These are not old adages. These are safe streets, better schools. That's what they
want.
Low taxes, crime
right.
taxes, education.
Keep the roads paved. Stay out of my life.
Basic stuff.
Right. Just
you're from the valley. You're from the western part of the state.
Right. And that's by and large, people want to be able to live their lives and not be not be controlled. So much.
I was when I was back in my day. When I was in the House.
Back when I was standing in front of you, when I was
when you were testifying in front of my committee.
Yeah.
Oh, that's ironic. That's so funny. I got on the elevator with a senator from Fairfax County, and he was just like, "Oh God, these people won't leave me alone." I'm like, "What's going on?" She's like, "These people back home, they're all over me on X, Y, and Z and ABC." And I'm like, oh, "Okay, sorry, man.
That's the job.
That's the job, dude. Well, congratulations, 18,000."
Yeah. Understand that going to the grocery store, particularly if you go by yourself, is going to take longer.
Oh, in our area it does.
Yeah.
In his area it doesn't, because they're anonymous. Because in Northern Virginia, they can't break through the media barrier, and so they have to do. Anyway.
Oh, geez.
And he goes, "Well, what do they contact you about?" I'm like, "Nothing. My people want to be left alone, and they mean it." And so, and we come from the same part of the state.
Right.
Like, look, just do the basics.
But the thing is, if they do contact you, then you daggum well better listen.
That's right.
Right? And do something about it.
If those people,
if it's possible, because if it's bad enough to come to you out there, it needs
and
to be
not.
paid
I'll see him at the ball game. I'll see him at church. I'll see him at the Food Lion. We know where he is. We can get him back home. But if we have to come to Richmond to talk to you, there's an issue.
There's sure enough an issue, right? And of course, when we're back home, the interesting thing, like at church, almost every week somebody will say, "So, how are things in Richmond?" And I'll go, they're asking me this in June, and I go, I don't know.
What I used to get a lot is, "Hey, how are things in D.C.?" I was like, "Well, it's a crazy town."
Yeah,
and they're like, I don't want to say,
right?
We're not in
D.C. and I'm only there during session or for a committee meeting, because I'm out here probably once or twice a month, but that's when we're not in session. But people don't understand that, or they'll see if Betsy's with me and at church, people will say, "I bet you're glad to have him home," and it's like, well,
yeah,
he
not really,
is,
but
he is most of the time.
Have you met him? Well, let's talk about that dynamics that have changed over time. You talked about when you came and testified before Joint Commission on Administrative Rules. When I was on that commission, and now you're in the House, looking to be in the Senate. What's changed?
Well, for one thing, I now sit on Joint Commission.
I do. No, I'm not coming before that commission. That's so
which I thought that was a real interesting thing to.
I still remember your testimony.
Have standing in front of it and then coming forward.
Well, politics has changed so much.
Yeah,
from there to there. I mean, internet, social media, iPhones.
That's what's changed. That's what's changed is everything is, and just in the 12 years that I have served here, the increase of the influence on that. Morning hour now with points of personal privilege, that used to not take so long, and if it did, it was because somebody was really making a point. And now what you're doing is pandering to YouTube, right? And
more performative.
And you've got a lot more performance going on. And it's why in the world did they waste our time with that? And it was so weak.
But none of it bubbles up. None of it gets out.
Well, it does to their little base, and that's the problem, is that we've created people that live in bubbles and they don't understand as much. And there's always been a certain element of that. I mean, living in live in Botetourt County, have represented Roanoke in a little part of Roanoke City, and there are colleagues that so we serve with from Fairfax that believe I'm in far Southwest Virginia.
Right.
They don't understand. I mean, they just don't understand the geography of the state, and they don't understand the things that we deal with. And I remember my first year here. This still is an issue, and it's going to be more. It's exacerbated by the redistricting because the population centers get more, and we get fewer and fewer representatives out in the West because our population isn't growing as much. But having a conversation with a group of lobbyists my first year here, Israel LeQuinn and I got asked to go out to dinner with a group of folks from Northern Virginia. We didn't know why. We figured that it was something that had to do with transportation and the transportation bill that was coming up that year, right? And they got to the end of the conversation, and I remember real well, one of them finally said, we got to serve dessert, and we're sitting there talking, and then one of them leaned over and said, so what do folks out your way think about folks in Northern Virginia?
Y'all don't want to know.
And I said, I sat there, and I did a true story. I said, you want an honest answer? And I said, yeah. I said, well, a bunch of folks out there would really love it if you'd secede. And they leaned forward and said, I guess you'd really want that tax revenue, though, still, wouldn't you? And I leaned right back and I said, and I think we'd be just fine without it. Thank you very much. And then that sort of set the stage for a little bit more testy conversation. And then it was about transportation.
Tuition.
Right. Well, and then it came down, and the honestly to say, they said, you don't understand. We've got roads up there that have not been repaved in 10 years. And I looked over at Israel, and we both looked back and said, you don't understand. We got roads our way. They've never been paved. And they were like, no. And I said, there are people in far Southwest Virginia that still have outhouses.
It's an dynamic. The regionalization, the balkanization of Virginia is, the Northern Virginia folks think they fund the rest of the state. Okay, fine, but the legal framework by which you have grown is protected by the ROVA.
Right, and believe me, and I said, so we have transportation needs on our way, and I said we got bridges that haven't been repaired in 50 years.
Well, and also,
now that's being taken care of. This is 12 years ago.
The tax revenue from the Commonwealth back in the day, with textiles, tobacco, agriculture, funded all the road construction in Northern Virginia that allowed them to grow out.
That's exactly
and we can't get into this balkanization.
No,
we know better than you. That does not help.
Well, the other issue
camaraderie here
that you hear discussed when people out our way start talking about it and get edgy about it is that a significant number of the people in Northern Virginia are not Virginians. They not only they weren't born and raised here, but they're not going to stay here. They're going to come in and they're going to vote for a few things, and then they're going to leave because the turnover is fairly significant when you get into those markets. Whereas it's not out our way. I mean, I'm unusual in that I didn't grow up where I serve, right? I'm not from there. I'm a Georgia boy natively, but I've lived in Virginia for nearly 35 years.
Right. Lived
in the Roanoke Valley for 27.
Yeah, you're a newbie.
But I'm a newbie, right? They keep electing me, but I'm a newbie, and that's I'm not going anywhere,
right.
And they know I'm not going
anywhere.
My
84-year-old father bought the house he lives in that I grew up in high school, 1979. Some people in town still refer to it as Charlotte Burnett's house.
Right.
Miss Burnett's house.
Right. Because
that's how they remember it.
Because that's what it always was, right? And so that's what the culture is out our way. And I think that's precious, and I think it's important, but those dynamics, you have to find a way then when we're sitting down talking with the people that, and again, I really believe that the people that are representing their districts, if you're going to do this, this has to be a calling. You've got some people that pop in and then pop right back out, and we've seen over the years people that serve 1 or 2 terms and then they're gone. But if you've been here any length of time, you do this because you are representing your constituents and you're really legitimately trying to make a difference in their lives and in the lives of the Commonwealth as a whole.
Because let's be honest, for $17,642 a year, you traipse all the way from Botetourt County to Richmond and live here during part of the year, the session, and it's not easy.
No,
it's not, this is public service because there's no wealth creation.
Well,
here.
and no, and you know, it's you know, feet on the floor at 5 a.m, and you are falling back into the bed late at night, and then rolling up and doing it again the next day.
No, it's exhausting.
And it's long days. I mean, and there's they're just long days, but it's important work. And people ask all the time too, are you having fun? It's the wrong question. There are moments when it really is fun.
Right.
But mostly it is just work, but it's very satisfying work if you're actually accomplishing something.
Right.
And the accomplishing can either be getting something done or keeping something really egregious from being done. Because there's some of that too that you've got to be able to.
Let's talk about that. We're at crossover. You know, you talked about the third rails issues that have not come up. Usually the hot button issues. When I would go home in session, they say, y'all talk about is abortion. I'm like, we never talk about abortion. The media does.
The media talks about it,
but we don't.
Right.
I mean, and so the third rails that you discussed earlier, on abortion and guns and whatever social issues, they're not. There's no movement really from chamber to chamber. Are they being discussed? In the political context?
They are. The abortion has been talked about some.
Okay.
I'm a solidly pro-life guy. I would love to see there not be abortion at all, but that's not going to be reality. I don't think any time in Virginia that it's going to be completely gone. And that's okay. But we've talked about it some, and there's been a lot of.
Is the game been reset from the Dobbs decision? Like, look, since it's going back to the states, we have to come up with our own regulatory framework now?
It has, but it's not because again, you got in the Senate, you got Louise Lucas saying to the governor, anything you want to do, we're the brick wall. I mean, I'm the brick wall, is what you would say. You're going to hit that. Okay, well, that's fine. But through this session, nothing is going to change, and then we'll see after the outcome of the election whether we can if we can change the dynamics in those chambers, and then we'll be able to maybe accomplish something moving along.
And to your previous point, because it's not going to move in the Senate, we're not going to move in the House.
So real quickly, you've got the abortion stuff. On the guns, we've had bills that have passed out of the House to try to ratchet back some of the anti-gun legislation from the previous 2 years, 3 years. The red flag laws. You've got some discussion about that. You've got the just a variety of things on that. I don't think any of which are going to survive the Senate at all. Election integrity stuff. I serve on Privileges and Elections Committee. We've passed legislation out of the House to roll back early voting to 14 days instead of 45 days. 45 days early voting is a lot. We've passed legislation to repeal the drop box. We've passed legislation for motor voter to return to being an opt-in for voter registration rather than an opt-out. That law has caused problems. We've had people that went to register their trailer at their farm where they don't live, but they had to put the address of the farm, and all of a sudden, because it was opt-out, they didn't opt out that they wanted to change their voter registration stuff, and all of a sudden they're now registered to vote in a county that they don't live in. That's happened. And it just tangles things up. So opt-in is a lot better.
Give me and I hate to say the bumper sticker reality to election laws or anything, but you really have to get things down to 3 or 5 words. People go, oh, okay, fine, because we live in a snippet. Sound by word. So what would be a brand, a title to what we need to do in election law here in Virginia? Cleaner, simpler, faster, whatever it is.
Well, I think what Kay Coles James has said about it is that it needs to be really, really easy to vote. And it needs to be really, really hard to cheat.
Okay.
All right. And if we can accomplish that with our legislation, where it's open to anybody that's supposed to vote.
Kay Coles James, very much respect her, really like her. I think that's a branding element that I don't see from any part of this session, and not just election integrity, but the other issues. What is there a message that Republicans are running on House or Senate that you go, yeah, we're all on this, boom, like, Bob's for jobs, no car tax cut, or whatever the issue is that's dominant. Is there a message? Is there a theme? Or is it developing?
I think it is developing.
Okay.
I think it's developing. But again, in a non-statewide year, you have less of a systemic one because you end up with the individual flavors of the elections in everybody's individual district.
Right. But
So
there's no connected dots. Oh, this is what's going on.
I don't think so. I don't.
That's my sense. I don't see like the big.
And that may be coming. We'll see.
I just don't see it. I mean, there's nothing really bubbling up. You talk about the governor's pushing a
For me,
tax
it's
cut
not the
program.
aisle. But,
No, I'm not saying.
Yeah,
I mean,
just,
if there's a Democrat here, I'm asking the same thing, or sitting right next to you, I'd be like, what are y'all doing? What's your branding element here coming in the election cycle?
And I think what you're going to see us pushing is you want good schools, you want to know that the content is what you want it to be. You want parental rights and parental involvement in those schools and involvement in the decisions that are being made. I mean, for heaven's sakes, Glenn Youngkin won the election on that issue.
Right.
And
I would submit some members of your party and some members of the other party didn't quite get that message.
I would agree. But I don't think they still do.
No.
And they're not paying attention.
And they're
not
paying
attention.
That's what their elections are for.
And so to your point, I think this is going to sort of bubble out in some of the local elections here. You've got that. People want safe streets.
Yep.
People want to make sure that, people that commit crimes are doing the time. We want safe streets. We want hardened violent criminals off the streets. And
you've been doing work on the parole board and the report the Attorney General put out.
I did some pretty big railing on Ms. Bennett from the floor.
Well, let's explain that to our audience who might not be fully aware. The Attorney General investigated, for lack of a better term, the parole board, came out with a pretty stunning report.
70 pages long. And it is, the more time I spend in it, the more angry I get. It's that bad. And when you've got laws that were just flat broken and laws that were ignored and policies that were just ignored or modified on a whim, not following any of the Administrative Process Act, we're not going to do it that way anymore because I don't want to do it that way anymore. Making stuff up. One of the staffers for Adrienne Bennett said she just sort of makes it up as she goes along. That's in the report, and it's outlined a lot. And as I outlined some things. The gentleman that I highlighted, one of them that I highlighted on the floor in the speech that I gave, was convicted of, actually committed 3 armed robberies in 1996, and then was convicted in 2000 to 3 consecutive life sentences for the armed robbery. It's pretty violent stuff. Okay, three convictions, three cases in 1996, and was granted parole by Ms. Bennett and this parole board that was under the Northam administration. The problem is that the General Assembly eliminated parole in 1995, the year before this guy committed the crime.
So
he was
and then parole was moved up to 85%.
By law, he was not eligible for parole at all, and that just didn't matter. And the 3 strikes law, right? Mm-hmm. She doesn't like that. She doesn't think that's good. And her Secretary of Public Safety, this was when Brian Moran looked at her and said, you got to have the law changed before you can ignore that. And they got Scott Surville to carry a bill, and it was defeated, and she just didn't care.
What was the authority then? She's a judge now.
She's a judge now, which also got done, and a lot of hand wringing over it at the time, but she's there, and then this stuff comes out. Here's the difficulty with it, and what the Attorney General's report happened.
How do you have a law? Because that's what George Allen ran on, passed abolition of parole, and I think it's up to 85% before you're eligible for parole.
Yep.
It really hammered crime. Crime was real bad in the 90s.
And it wasn't, but it's getting bad again.
The federal crime bill,
right.
Joe Biden. Let's not talk about that, Joe. We're fine. You can go do something else. Oh, watch the balloon. many crickets. So you have a situation where this person post the parole abolition bill being enacted into law, and she just says, I'm going to parole him anyway?
Yeah.
How? How is that legal?
It's not.
What the hell?
It's not. But that's the problem. And, laws are there for the reason, and the General Assembly is who gets to make the laws. And so what I said was, with this report that's there, and the thing that we found in the report, and that the Attorney General said, is the difficulty is that all of the things that she's guilty of were on book by statute misdemeanors, and the statute of limitations has run its course by the time we got this investigation done, because nobody was looking at this before he got here. And by the time he was able to get in and start digging it out, it's too late to prosecute, but it's not too late for us to take some action if we needed to in the General Assembly. And so, I said flat out, she needs to resign because it would save us some trouble. But if she's not willing to, we have to take some steps.
And then she resigned.
No.
She didn't resign?
No.
All right, that'll be fun.
So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
And you say, how does it happen? Laws are only good. It's like, it's against the law to speed. How does this happen? People just do it. They're going to continue to do it until it becomes really expensive to continue to do that. You can say it's illegal to steal.
But if
there's
no enforcement,
but if there's no enforcement,
people are walking out of California with grocery carts full of $800, $900 worth of food and other goods, and they're not stopped by police because they can't prosecute them. Just walk out with it.
Right. And
the point being, obviously, if you don't
enforce the laws, if you don't take the steps, then there are no laws. It's just anarchy, and there is a segment of society that thinks that that's a good thing, and it's catastrophic.
Well, yeah, it's bad. Are folks back home talking about that?
More and more.
Okay, so that's bubbling up.
More and more. It's bubbling up. And again, you go home on the weekend, see folks at church, and these are some of the things that people are paying attention to.
Right.
So we hope that it'll stick.
Okay. Let's wrap it up and have a little bit of fun here. What are you reading now? Any books in particular? I got one right here. Where's my camera?
The
myth of left
and right.
Left and right really are social constructs, not actual ideological ones.
Yeah.
Good book.
I'm not reading anything new. I'm rereading some stuff. I'm back to some of my old favorites with C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
A book of his. I've given it away to some friends of mine too. But if you've never read The Abolition of Man,
okay,
it is my very favorite C.S. Lewis book.
Okay.
And the reason is this was written in the late 40s, and he did a review. He was asked to do a review of a text that would teach English grammar to our equivalent of about 7th grade, 6th and 7th grade. And he read it and read one of the statements that they made at the beginning of it and thought, this is planting a seed that is going to be the destruction of the whole of creation. And he ends up one of the chapters is Men Without Chests. Okay. And the idea is that we become completely empty vessels. There's no purpose in being.
Well, it's interesting, especially at that time in human history, coming after the great 30 Years' War of the World War I and World War II. And I read a book this morning. I went back to sleep. I woke up at like 1:30. Went back to bed at like 2:30. But the book I'm reading by George Weigel is how basically the end of Christendom in the 19th and 18th and 19th centuries, and what it manifested in that time, and then how it rolled out into the time you're speaking of when C.S. Lewis was writing this. Is that because of the destruction of the church in Europe in the 19th century, you had this lack of mooring, this moral mooring that didn't exist anymore, and we became, almost post in a modern society, and there really was no chest, there was no moral sin.
And that's his whole point. At the very end of the book, he talks about the people that want to always see through to the thing, to the next thing. Well, you just sort of need to see through that. We have to sort of see through that. I know you think it's an issue. Let's see through that. He said, if you keep seeing through first principles, you've got a problem. And the illustration that he uses at the very end of the book when he says, it's really good that you can see through the window, if you're looking at the garden beyond.
Right.
But if you see through the garden, then what good is it to see through the window if you can't see the garden there? And he said, if you continue to see through everything, then there's nothing left to see at all. And he says, eventually, to see through is the same as to not see.
Right. Nihilism.
Because he says a wholly transparent world is an invisible world.
And nihilism. You don't believe in anything.
Yeah, and it
there's
just,
no more.
And there's no mooring there at all. And
let's go to the movies now.
This is good stuff. Oh gosh,
Anything new? Anything exciting? The Grammys were on the other night. I didn't watch it. Did you see?
I don't.
Any movies, TVs that we should be aware of? And I don't want to talk about the Georgia Bulldogs.
Now, see, we could have taken the whole time talking about the Georgia Bulldogs.
That's why I don't want to talk about it.
I know.
I think it's a great football team.
It's glorious as a Georgia grad. TV shows. I'm still a huge fan of Blue Bloods.
Okay.
Just because I think I love the fact that that's a really very cohesive family.
Tom Selleck.
Right is right and wrong is wrong. And at the end of the day, they all sit down around the table and are talking it over on Sunday dinner, and they are always going to say grace before the meal, before anybody gets started. That's just what, there's just foundational stuff. It's just good old fashioned television. The Rookie is real good. Fun to watch. My wife really likes that one.
Okay.
There's what the problem is now with entertainment is there's so daggum much stuff out there.
No, there's no.
You just drown in it.
Well, it also divides us because we don't have any social commonality.
Right. I had never gotten around to it. I've just started watching The Chosen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's more in I think that's really important, and that's I'm much more drawn right now to the things that are going to keep me grounded in my faith in the midst of this crazy world, because I think that's going to be critically important for all of us. But
I know you've got an election coming up this year as well. New Senate district.
New Senate district, yeah.
And, what's the filing deadlines? What's all the
filing opens for that in March.
Opens.
Yeah, because it's a state-run primary.
Okay, it's primary for the
primary
Senate
will
district.
be June the 20th.
Right,
and
June 20th.
This is a district that's the top half of Roanoke County, all of Botetourt, all of Craig, all of Allegheny, all of Rockbridge, and about 25% of Augusta, all of Stanton, all of Waynesboro.
Wow, it's a big district.
Huge district.
Big district.
Great people, though. My gosh.
It's a unique part of the world, and wonderful people out there.
Very consistent district too, as far as the values and the kind of people that are there. It's just small towns, and again, to what we were talking about earlier, it's just a bunch of folks that want to have good schools, safe streets, moral values around for the people. Leave me alone.
Right. So it's a state-run primary. Any announced opponents yet in the Republican nomination?
One other gentleman from Roanoke that announced last week.
Okay, I haven't seen that. And of course, the big unknown is Senator Hanger. Is he going to come into the northern part of that district?
Yeah, and who knows?
Haven't heard. Okay,
haven't heard. I've been running for a year.
Okay,
so I announced I announced last February. Had immediately in congressional endorsements with me, because I had Ben Klein sitting on one shoulder and Morgan Griffith sitting on the other, and my wife standing there with me when I made the announcement last February. And we've been working for the whole year trying to get in front of everybody and get to know the district and let everybody know me. Because if you're from Botetourt or if you're from Roanoke County and you're participating in politics at all, I got pretty good name ID down there.
Right.
You go to Rockbridge. They didn't know me. They do now.
Yeah.
I hope so anyway.
Well, I would imagine after a year of running, they probably have an idea of who you are. I'm sure your ID numbers are coming up. But anyway, Delegate Chris Head, wish you all the best in crossover today. Hope you get out relatively early.
Me too.
It's a grind. Short sessions are a grind, especially with this redistricting overlay. And it's been an interesting conversation about where things are and how people are responding to that new framework, that new redistricting reality.
So it's always good to be here.
All right. Thanks for joining us on the VIP podcast, available on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Thanks again to the VCTA, Broadband Association of Virginia, and Virginia Free for sponsoring this show. Thanks for joining us.